There is a recording circulating right now that the music industry desperately does not want you to hear. Not a song, not a leaked track, a conversation, a private moment between two of the most powerful men who ever touched a stage, Michael Jackson and MC Hammer, where the king of pop looked another legend dead in the eye and said 7 words about Beyoncé that could shatter everything you thought you knew about the biggest star on the planet. 7 words. That is all it took. And when you hear them, and I mean really hear them, something clicks. Because suddenly, every strange coincidence, every buried controversy, every quiet tension that has followed this woman's career for over 2 decades starts making a terrifying kind of sense. But here is the part nobody is talking about. Michael was not the only one. Prince, the purple one himself, the man who could play 27 instruments and made the entire music industry bow, he had his own private war with the Beyonce machine. And what he said, the way he said it, where he said it, that changes everything. Now, layer on top of that what Katt Williams just blew wide open in front of millions of people, claiming he has inside knowledge from both regions, and you start to realize this is not celebrity gossip. This is an expose that has been building for over 20 years, and it is finally breaking through the surface. I need you to lock in right now, because once you see the full picture, you cannot unsee it. This is the story they tried to bury. And we are about to dig it all the way up. Let me set the scene for you, because the context here is everything. Picture the early 2000s. Michael Jackson is still the undisputed king of pop. His legacy is cemented in a way that no artist alive could touch. And MC Hammer, one of the most explosive performers of his generation, is in the room with him. Not a press event, not a concert, a private conversation between 2 men who understood performance at a molecular level. They are talking about dance, about artistry, about who really has it and who is faking it. And Hammer later recounted this exchange in detail that sent shockwaves through the internet. According to Hammer, Michael told him straight up, "You are the greatest dancer. It's not even close." That alone is a monumental statement. Michael Jackson, the man who invented the moonwalk, the man whose every move became a cultural earthquake, telling Hammer he was the greatest, that is not something you just brush past. But the conversation did not stop there. It took a dark turn. Hammer, being respectful, tried to bring up Beyoncé. He suggested, subtly, that maybe she was approaching that same level. Maybe she was getting close. And according to what has been shared publicly, Michael Jackson shut it down immediately. No hesitation, no diplomacy, no polite deflection. He reportedly said, "She takes lessons. She's not that good." Let those 7 words sit with you for a moment. The king of pop, the man who defined what it meant to be a performer, looked at the Beyoncé phenomenon and said, "She is not that good." Now, before the beehive comes for me, let me be clear. I am not saying this is the definitive truth about Beyoncé's talent. What I am saying is that the most successful entertainer in the history of planet Earth felt strongly enough to say those words out loud to another legend. That is not shade for the sake of shade. That is a professional assessment from someone who understood the craft better than anyone alive. And when you start pulling on that thread, when you start looking at what else was happening behind the scenes, things get very uncomfortable very fast. Because Michael was not alone in this. There was someone else watching, someone even more meticulous, even more obsessive about musical purity, and his name was Prince. Now, Prince was a different breed entirely. Prince communicated through spectacle. Prince communicated through precision. Every word he spoke in public was deliberate. Every gesture was loaded with meaning. So when a story surfaced about Prince offering to teach Beyoncé piano, people initially took it at face value. Oh, how sweet. Prince mentoring the next generation. But the people who really know Prince, the ones who understood how his mind worked, they heard something completely different. According to the account that has been widely discussed, Prince was curious about how much Beyoncé actually knew musically, not how well she could perform, not how well she could execute choreography someone else designed. He wanted to know what she understood about music, about theory, about the architecture of sound. So he sat down with her and started showing her some chords on the piano. And here's where it gets razor sharp. He later spoke about the experience publicly, saying he was trying to help her understand that if she learned piano in the tradition of Aretha Franklin and Ray Charles, the sky would be the limit for what she could do. Now, on the surface, that sounds like encouragement, but listen to the construction of that sentence one more time. If she learns piano. If. That word carries an ocean of implication. Prince was not saying she was already there. He was not saying she was close. He was saying there was a fundamental gap, and he was drawing a line between artists who build their sound from the ground up and artists who, in his view, rely on something else entirely. And when you combine that with another statement Prince made publicly, a statement that landed like a bomb in the music world, the picture becomes devastatingly clear. Prince looked into a camera and said, "I am a musician. I do not sample. It is not Memorex. I go on stage and my microphone is on." Every single phrase in that statement is a surgical strike. I am a musician, meaning some people who call themselves musicians are not. I do not sample, meaning the practice of building hits on top of other people's work is, in his eyes, lesser. It is not Memorex, meaning what you hear from him is real and live, not manufactured or reproduced. And my microphone is on, which many interpreted as a direct shot at performers who rely on backing tracks, pre-recorded vocals, or heavily produced live shows. Now, Prince never named Beyoncé directly. He never had to, because the audience connected the dots instantly. When you think about a track like Crazy in Love, one of the biggest hits of the 2000s, and you realize it's built on a massive sample from the Chai Lights, and then you hear Prince saying he doesn't sample, the implication writes itself. And this was not a one-time comment. This was a worldview. Prince believed that true musicianship meant creating everything from scratch, mastering your instruments, understanding harmony, and pouring your own soul into every note. And by that standard, by the Prince standard, a lot of modern pop music was an imitation dressed up as innovation, including, many believed, the Beyoncé catalog. And then came the moment that cracked this whole thing wide open. Katt Williams, the comedian known for being fearless with a microphone and absolutely reckless with the truth, went on record and started connecting the dots that the industry had been trying to keep separate for years. Katt did not tiptoe. He did not use vague language. He went straight in, making bold claims that Beyoncé's rise to megastardom was not as organic as the public narrative suggested. That there was heavy strategy, heavy machinery, and heavy maneuvering happening behind the curtain. And here is what made his words hit so differently. Katt Williams was tight with Prince, not in a casual, we hung out at a party once kind of way. They were genuinely close. They had real conversations. They shared perspectives on the industry. So when Katt started dropping these claims, people understood immediately that this was not just a comedian running his mouth. This was someone who had been in the room when Prince was speaking candidly about the state of music, about who was real and who was manufactured. According to what Katt shared, both Prince and Michael Jackson had real tension with Beyoncé's operation, not necessarily with her as a person, but with the machinery behind her, with the way her career was being constructed and presented to the world. And when Katt threw out a name of someone they both loved and respected, testing to see if she was on their level, the response he claims he received was immediate and unambiguous. No, she is not on our level. She takes less. That is allegedly what was communicated. And whether you believe every word of it or not, the fact that someone with those connections is willing to say it publicly tells you something significant about what was happening behind the scenes in the music industry during that era. Now, let me connect this to something concrete, because the philosophical debate about musicianship did not stay abstract. It manifested in real controversies that played out in public view. In the summer of 2022, when Beyoncé dropped her Renaissance album, something erupted that validated every concern Prince had ever raised about sampling culture. Tellus, the artist behind the iconic 2003 hit Milkshake, came out swinging. She accused Beyoncé of using an interpolation of Milkshake on the track Energy without reaching out to her directly, without giving her a heads up, without even a phone call. And the way Kellis spoke about it was not calm or measured. It was raw, emotional, and loaded with frustration. She called it theft. She compared the experience to being disrespected by someone she thought operated at a higher standard. Now, the legal details are complicated. The production credits for Milkshake are held by Pharrell Williams and Chad Hugo, which means technically Beyoncé's team may have cleared the sample through them without needing Kellis's permission. But here's the thing that Prince was always talking about. The legality is one conversation, the ethics is another. And in the eyes of many artists, going around the performer to clear a sample through the producers felt cold, calculated, and exactly like the kind of industry machinery that Prince had been warning about for decades. The reaction was so intense and the public backlash so loud that Beyoncé's team eventually removed the Milkshake interpolation from Energy on streaming platforms. That is a significant move. You do not alter a finished album after release unless the heat is unbearable. And that moment right there became a case study in everything Prince had been saying. The sample first, ask questions later approach to making music had real consequences. It hurt real people, and it raised legitimate questions about where the line exists between inspiration and appropriation. But the sampling controversy is just the tip of something much deeper. Because when you start looking at the songwriting credits across Beyoncé's discography, a pattern emerges that has had industry insiders whispering for years. Let me start with the one that still stings the most, If I Were a Boy. You know this song. It is one of Beyoncé's most emotionally resonant tracks. It felt personal. It felt like it came from her heart. She performed it with conviction that made audiences believe every single word. But here's the truth that got buried under the spectacle. That song was not written by Beyoncé. It was written by a young songwriter named B.C. Jean, who poured her real heartbreak, her real pain, her real lived experience into those lyrics after going through a devastating breakup. B.C. Jean wrote that song as an expression of genuine emotion, a personal diary entry set to music. And through industry mechanics, through the kind of behind-the-scenes maneuvering that most fans never see, that song ended up on Beyoncé's album. Yes, B.C. Jean received the songwriting credit, but the way the situation unfolded left a bitter taste for many who followed the story closely, because the public perception was always that Beyoncé was the emotional architect of that record, and that perception was never corrected with the same energy it was created with. Then there's Irreplaceable. Remember when Beyoncé stood on a stage in front of tens of thousands of screaming fans and said, "I wrote this song for all the women out there"? That moment was powerful. It was inspiring. And according to Ne-Yo, the actual songwriter behind those lyrics, it was not entirely accurate. Ne-Yo has spoken publicly about writing Irreplaceable, and while the collaborative nature of modern music means multiple people can contribute to a track, the way credit and narrative were assigned in the public eye raised serious questions. When the person performing the song claims ownership of the emotional core, and the actual writer has to come forward later to correct the record, something in the system is broken. And then comes the bootylicious situation, which adds another layer to this already towering cake of controversy. Beyoncé told a story about being in Japan, hearing the Stevie Nicks sample, and being struck by creative inspiration that led to the song Bootylicious. It sounded organic, spontaneous, like art happening in real time. But producer Rob Fusari later came forward and shared a very different version of events, suggesting the creative genesis of that track came from him. When you line up all of these instances, and there are more beyond what I have time to cover, you start to see why someone like Prince, who wrote, produced, and played virtually everything on his own albums, might look at this situation and feel a certain way. And you start to understand why Michael Jackson, who was deeply involved in every aspect of his creative process, might hear about these dynamics and say what he allegedly said to MC Hammer. The songwriting questions are damaging enough on their own, but when visual artistry enters the conversation, the pattern becomes even harder to dismiss. In 2011, Beyoncé released the music video for Countdown, and it immediately sparked a firestorm. Viewers started noticing that the choreography and visual compositions bore a striking resemblance to the work of Anne-Therese de Keersmacher, a legendary Belgian choreographer whose artistic vocabulary is deeply personal and highly distinctive. At first, Beyoncé's team framed it as a tribute, an homage to a great artist. And in creative fields, homage is a respected tradition. But there is a difference between homage and replication, and many felt this crossed the line. The visuals were not just inspired by de Keersmacher's work. They appeared to mirror specific sequences, specific camera angles, specific movement patterns. When de Keersmacher herself saw the video, her response was pointed. She essentially said, "This looks very familiar," and she did not frame that as flattery. She framed it as a legitimate concern about creative boundaries. And this is where the bigger narrative crystallizes. Because when you have songwriting controversies, sampling disputes, and now visual plagiarism accusations all orbiting the same artist, you are no longer looking at isolated incidents. You are looking at a pattern, and patterns demand explanation. Now, let me take you somewhere that very few people are willing to go, because this part of the story involves timing so suspicious that it almost feels orchestrated. Janet Jackson. Remember her? Before the 2004 Super Bowl halftime show, Janet was at the top of her game. She was a global icon, a hitmaker, and one of the most influential performers of her generation. Then came the wardrobe malfunction, and almost overnight, her career was throttled. Radio stations stopped playing her music. Invitations dried up. The industry that had celebrated her for decades turned its back with shocking speed. And during that exact window of devastation for Janet, Beyoncé's ascent accelerated dramatically. Now, I want to be careful here, because correlation does not equal causation. But the timing has been a talking point for years, and it is not just random internet speculation. People within the industry have quietly noted how the vacuum created by Janet's forced absence seemed to benefit one artist more than any other. And, according to the discussions that have surfaced over time, Janet herself reportedly had her own quiet opinions about Beyoncé's approach to drawing inspiration from other artists. The specifics of what she said or felt are debated, but the notion that there was tension, that there was awareness, that the Jackson family as a whole had complicated feelings about the Beyoncé narrative, that part seems consistent across multiple accounts. When Mama Tina Knowles stepped in publicly to defend Beyoncé's originality after some of these discussions went viral, the response was swift and passionate. But in situations like this, a vigorous defense sometimes draws more attention to the accusation than the accusation itself. And the conversation, rather than dying down, only got louder. And then came perhaps the most concise and devastating assessment from someone inside the creative process. Tiffany Red, a songwriter who has worked in the industry and understands its mechanics intimately, delivered a statement that cut through all the noise with surgical precision. She said, "I think Beyoncé is a brilliant artist. I also think that Beyoncé is a hypocrite." Read that again. Brilliant and hypocrite in the same breath. That is not a hater talking. That is not someone on the outside throwing stones. That is someone who respects the talent but cannot reconcile it with the behavior. And the reason that quote resonated so powerfully is because it articulated what many people had been feeling but could not find the words to express. You can acknowledge someone's brilliance while also questioning their methods. You can appreciate the art while scrutinizing the process behind it. And when a credible voice from within the industry puts those two ideas together so cleanly, it becomes impossible to dismiss. The delivery was calm, almost gentle, but the weight of it was enormous, because that single word, hypocrite, encapsulated every songwriting controversy, every sampling dispute, every visual plagiarism accusation, and every instance where the public narrative did not match the behind-the-scenes reality. Just when you think the pressure could not get more intense, Charlemagne the God stepped into the arena and dropped a take so explosive that it practically broke the internet. He suggested, on a major platform with millions of listeners, that Beyoncé could one day surpass Michael Jackson. Not match him, surpass him. The reaction was volcanic. Michael Jackson fans, already protective of a legacy that was cut tragically short, pushed back with a force that shook social media for days. They pointed out that Michael changed music globally, that he broke racial barriers in the media, that his influence reshaped the entire entertainment industry in ways that are still being felt decades later. And comparing anyone to that, regardless of how talented they are, felt not just premature but fundamentally unfair to many. But Charlemagne was not the only one making that argument. Chance the Rapper took it even further. He publicly stated that Beyoncé's Coachella performance was better than any Michael Jackson performance ever. And he doubled down with the line, "That woman is better than Mike." Now, whether you agree with that or not, and strong opinions exist on both sides, the statement did something important. It forced people to confront how we measure artistic greatness. Is it about raw innovation, cultural impact, commercial success, live performance ability, longevity, all of the above? And here's the uncomfortable truth that this entire debate reveals. Michael Jackson and Prince were not just talented, they were architects. They built new worlds from nothing. They played instruments, wrote songs, produced albums, designed shows, and pushed creative boundaries that did not exist before them. And when people tried to place Beyoncé in that same category, the controversies we've been discussing become impossible to dismiss, because the question stops being, is she talented, which no reasonable person would deny, and starts being, how was that talent built, and who else contributed to it, and how transparent has the process been? Those are the questions that Prince and Michael were really asking, and those are the questions that still do not have satisfying answers. So let me pull all of this together, because when you see these threads as a single tapestry, the image that forms is both fascinating and deeply uncomfortable. You have two of the greatest musical geniuses who ever lived, both expressing skepticism about the same artist through different channels and at different times. You have a comedian with insider access confirming and amplifying those sentiments. You have multiple songwriters and producers raising questions about creative credit and ownership. You have a visual plagiarism controversy that was acknowledged but never fully resolved. You have a sampling dispute so heated it led to a finished album being altered after release. You have a timeline that suggests one artist's misfortune directly coincided with another's rise. And you have an industry that has been remarkably quiet about all of it, as if there is an unspoken agreement that certain narratives are not to be questioned. What does all of this mean? It means the story of Beyoncé's dominance is far more complex than the carefully curated image suggests. It does not mean she is not talented. Let me be absolutely clear about that. The woman can perform. The woman can command a stage. The woman has built one of the most powerful brands in entertainment history. But the path to that throne has more fingerprints on it than the official story acknowledges. And when the two artists most qualified to judge musical greatness both raised red flags, that is not something you can just dismiss with loyalty or fandom. Prince saw it from the perspective of a purist who believed every note should be original and every skill should be earned through mastery. Michael saw it from the perspective of someone who understood the difference between natural ability and manufactured perfection. And Katt Williams saw it from the perspective of someone who watched both legends wrestle with these feelings privately and decided the world deserved to know. Here is the thing about truth in the entertainment industry. It does not come out all at once. It leaks. It drips. It surfaces in interviews years later, in offhand comments that get caught on camera, in the memoirs of people who were in the room when the doors were closed. And what we are witnessing right now, with Katt Williams speaking out, with old interviews resurfacing, with the pattern becoming undeniable, this is one of those drip moments. The dam has not broken yet, but there are cracks everywhere. And every new revelation, every old clip that gets rediscovered, every songwriter who decides to tell their side of the story adds pressure to a structure that was built to protect an image, not to reveal the truth. So whether you are a member of the Beehive who thinks this is all manufactured outrage, or whether you are someone who has always felt something was off about the narrative, or whether you are a die-hard Michael Jackson or Prince supporter who believes their legacy deserves better, one thing is certain. This conversation is not going away. It is getting louder. It is getting more specific. And it is getting harder to ignore. The talent is real. The brand is real. The success is real. But the full story? That is something we are only just beginning to understand. And I have a feeling we have not heard the last of it. Not even close. Now, I want to hear from you, because a story this layered deserves every perspective. Whose side of this do you believe? Do you think Prince and Michael were protecting the integrity of music, or were they gatekeeping greatness? Was Katt Williams telling the truth, or was he stirring the pot for attention? And most importantly, does any of this change how you see Beyonce? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with anyone who cares about music, about truth, and about the stories that get hidden behind the spotlight. Hit that like button if this opened your eyes to something new, and subscribe because this is just the beginning. The next chapter of this story is coming, and trust me, you are not going to want to miss it.